This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by Alex Newman. Alex, as always, wonderful to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you, Duke.
So we're going to enter the territory of those issues that no one wants to talk about. One of these things that is right in front of us, it's in our face, yet we're not allowed to talk about it. And I want to stop with this video because I think it says it all. We have a young Jewish woman with a baby on her bicycle is trying to get through while an African-American in a car, African-American male, is blocking the access. And so the only way she can get around this guy is to get into the street where it's dangerous. And the conversation between the young Jewish woman who's simply politely asking, can you move so I can get across, turns into a vile example of anti-Semitic nonsense. Take a look at the video.
All I'm asking you to do is move out of the bike lane.
I don't care what you're asking. I don't got to comply with you.
No, of course not. But that's just the law.
So go your ass around.
It's not safe. I don't want to go into the contraband lane.
Your life is not my concern.
I understand that. I am, in fact.
I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew you was a Jew. You people are the devil. Now we're going. I knew it. You are the devil. Now we're going. Hey, bro, get to Karen, bro. She is trash. This is why you're doing this, because you think you entitled.
You are the devil. You are trash. I knew you was a Jew. How's that, Alex? And, you know, I'm going to throw the red herring right on the table to begin, and I'll turn it over to you. Can you imagine if this was some Karen white girl who actually turned around and said something like that to a black person? Where would the end of this be? I mean, Joe Biden would be holding a summit today on American racism. But, you know, when an African-American man berates a young Jewish woman with a baby, that's supposedly what? Social justice?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, and you know, in a way, it's very bigoted as well. The left has created these different standards for different categories of people, and so they just have this assumption that people with darker skin tones are supposed to behave like this, will behave like this, and so they're not held to the same standard. There's no accountability, and this was a perfect example of that right there.
Yeah, so is it racism, the left's racism, right? The idea that black people, by definition, can't be racist, they can't be bigots. Is that what it is? Or is it a more worse kind of racism? The idea that black people can't control themselves, we can't hold them accountable because what? Their worldview, their intelligence isn't high enough to behave a certain way. I mean, either way, we're dealing with racist. And we're dealing with left-wing racism. But which is worse? The idea that black people have suffered so much they can't be bigots no matter what they do, or they, as we see in the public schools, you just can't compete, so therefore everything is white supremacy, therefore don't bother at school. Which of the two things would you say it is?
I think there's a little bit of both of those there. And actually in the book, Crimes of the Educators, Dr. Sam Blumenfeld and I both go into great depth exposing this progressive bigotry. If you go back 100 years, the progressive movement was really, really into eugenics, and they were really into this pseudo-scientific idea that there was something inherently inferior about black people. These are the Margaret Sangers of the world. These are the people who built the public education system. These were the bigwigs at the Teachers College at Columbia University. They had this incredibly racist view that black people were somehow inferior, so they needed to be given an inferior education. They needed to be prepared for basically manual labor, no thinking involved. And so this kind of subtle bigotry that continues to exist today actually has its roots in this overt racism of the progressive movement that, of course, inspired people like Adolf Hitler. It was funded by the Rockefellers. So there's been a long, long history of racism and bigotry within the progressive movement. Over the last maybe 20 or 30 years, they've started frantically pointing the finger at conservatives and saying, no, you're the racist, when of course they've been the racist all along. But I think what we're seeing with this case and so many others is just the latest manifestation of this. We saw it during the Black Lives Matter thing, right? You've got these weird, skinny white kids with green hair and, boogers coming out their nose. And they're shrieking at black police officers, calling them the N-word. You're like, what in the world? but it makes perfect sense if you're a progressive and you believe these pseudoscientific notions in biology.
The woman in question her handle is DC Trike Mom. Obviously, the bicycle she's riding is a tricycle, one of those big tricked out ones. She lives in Washington, D.C., and she's also a Jewish mom. And one of the things that was said by the African American guy was, I don't care about your life. Your life doesn't matter to me. And that, to me, no one's talking about. The epithets, the racism is one thing. But what we're seeing now from this guy, basically, your life is meaningless to me. And that was even before he knew she was Jewish. Your life means nothing to me. And that is a big problem in the African American community. We can talk all we want about George Floyd. We can talk all we want about the rare instances where white cops shoot black people unjustly. It's a very small number of the time. But no one wants to talk about the black on white violence. Nobody wants to talk about black on black violence. I mean, where is Black Lives Matter in Chicago, where every weekend it seems 40, 50, 60 people are killed, black people killing other black people? Nobody cares about this. And you see it here, this disregard for life, this idea that I don't care about your life, whoever you are. You don't matter to me. I may be breaking the law. I may be risking your child danger for having to go around me, but I don't care about your life. Nobody cares. And let's not forget the higher than any other race incidences of black abortion. There's a certain callous, we don't care about your life attitude coming from significant parts of the African American community. And to even bring this up means that you and I are racist, but somebody's got to talk about it. Where does this destructive nihilism come from among blacks? Is it simply just white people do this to them? Are white people responsible for Jussie Smollett, right? Who, by the way, still hasn't served his term, having been found guilty for making up a hate crime that wasn't true. What are we dealing with here, Alex? What's the deeper problem here?
Well, incidentally, a lot of the problems that we see are actually caused by the progressive policies of the progressives who, of course, are racist. And this has been well documented. I mean, this isn't something that you have to speculate on. You look, for example, at fatherless homes. Children raised in fatherless homes are drastically more likely to become violent, to become criminals, to become addicted to drugs, to drop out of school, to not be able to control their temper. And so you have now, after multiple generations of progressive policies. Well, hey, let's put single mothers on welfare. Let's encourage the destruction of the family. Let's dumb down the population in these government brainwash camps masquerading as schools. And then you see the fruit of that. And so I think a lot of these liberal progressives, it can't be the progressive policies that are to blame. And so quietly and subtly, it just must be something about them, right? And you go back to the progressive view of 100 years ago that there's something inferior about other races. And so they rationalize this, they justify this, and then to add insult to injury, they think of themselves as the saviors. Well, black people don't really know what's good for them, so we, the white savior progressives, are going to come in and we're going to adopt the right policies that are going to really help them get ahead by, for example, whining about white privilege, or, for example, tearing down capitalism, right? So you have this vicious cycle where the black community is being exploited, the black community is being abused, and so are all of us. But, again, the fatherless homes, direct result of the establishment of the government's policies, I would argue almost certainly deliberate, produces this terrible fruit. And what do they say? Well, we need more progressive policies to fix the horror show that progressive policies have unleashed on America. There's some really, really good documentaries that explore this in depth. Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2. I cannot recommend them highly enough, because what they show is that the progressive policies have been absolutely devastating to the black community, to the black family, to black-owned businesses. I mean, the progressives have been a destructive force of unimaginable proportions. It's like a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of the black community. And then they say they're going to solve it with more of the same madness that caused it in the first place. And so I think internally, a lot of these progressives truly believe that they are superior. These white liberal progressives, they think they're better than everybody else. They're smarter than everybody else. And so they are going to be the good guys in this story. And they're going to take care of those poor black people who just can't seem to get along on their own. Whereas if they had just been left to their own devices without all this help from the progressives, they would have strong families, they'd have prosperous businesses, etc. And you see this so incredibly clearly in the Democrat cities, right? The worst places in America. I grew up in the third world. The inner cities in Democrat-run major cities in America, they're worse than the stuff that I saw growing up in the third world. In many cases, they're worse than the favelas. You've got horrible violence. You've got needles everywhere. You got poop in the streets. I mean, it's like worse than some of the slums in Haiti. You can't even imagine this stuff. And we've had 50 years of Democrat progressive rule in these cities. If Democrat progressive policies were going to help these people, they'd be the most prosperous, freest, strongest individuals in the world. Instead, it's just the opposite. So what do? They triple down. They say more of the same is going to fix it. But at this point, anybody who doesn't recognize that this is a scam is an idiot.
Well, this also explains something else. Why is there so many black leadership voices standing athwart Israel and supporting Hamas and the murders? And it makes perfectly sense based on what you said. This isn't about, ultimately, when it gets down to it, it's not about race. It's about power. It's about how you get power. And we've convinced people, A, that they're victims. B, if you're a victim, then you have the right to kill if necessary to effect what they call restorative justice, right? And so you see many leadership black voices standing with Hamas, which is incredibly ironic when you think about the history of Islam and its attitude towards racial minorities. This is not the inclusive religion that the left would have you believe when it comes to people who think and look differently. It never has been. And so, yeah, these are big, huge problems. I get you're exactly right. The progressive leftists are the ones who've wrought this. But I still ask one step beyond that. Christianity, the African Americans in this country were more Christian than white Christians up and through the civil movement, right? The civil rights movement. And we know that immediately prior to civil rights, that the black family was the stablest family in America, not the weakest. Black moms and dads, husbands and wives stayed together at higher levels until these progressive ideologies. But I guess what I'm asking, be over and above what the progressives have done to African Americans, particularly in the cities, where is this coming from, this disregard for life, the idea that any avenue that would pull African Americans and inner cities up and out of poverty are somehow white plots. We're telling kids now, black kids in public schools, that education is white supremacy. Math and science are compromised, that to do well in those things, to be a young African American, is to be acting white and selling out your people. And then we're telling them there's no point in studying at all, because no matter how hard you work academically, you'll still be frozen out by a culture that hates you. This death spiral, these suicidal tendencies culturally that we see in this community is dangerous. And I think perhaps the answer is God, right? Maybe as God is abandoned increasingly by socialists, the ones in charge of the education of young minorities, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that we're seeing a level of hate and indifference that you would expect to see, like you said, Alex, in a foreign third world country.
Yeah, and there's so much truth to that, Duke. There's more, I think, than people even begin to realize. 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago, the Soviet Union was looking at the United States of America and trying to figure out, how do we take them down? They're so prosperous, they're so free, they're so Christian. What do we do? And Soviet strategists came up with the idea of, let's try to drive a gigantic wedge between Americans descended of Europeans and Americans descended from Africans. And so they sent enormous numbers of agents into the black communities all across the southern United States and started spreading the doctrines of communism. They actually wanted to, and we know this from Soviet archives and we know this from the FBI archives. The media likes to poo-poo this as if it were some sort of conspiracy theory. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. Now, it is a documented fact. Again, American Federal archives and Soviet archives document this. They wanted to create what they described at the time as a Negro Soviet republic in the southern United States. And so it was a tough nut to crack. The black community in America, even though there was still discrimination, et cetera, they were very patriotic. They were very faithful, firmly attached to Christianity and to God. And they were on their way up. Their businesses were becoming prosperous. Their cities were becoming prosperous. And so the Soviets came in and started agitating, started sending their agents in. And this continued for a very long time. I mean, these are things that people don't like to talk about. These are the things that people can get canceled for talking about. One of Martin Luther King Jr.'s top people, Stanley Levinson, was actually a member of the Communist Party USA. This is a guy who was writing speeches for him. This was a guy who was basically his handler, was a member of the Communist Party USA. That's not to take away from the beautiful and eloquent words that Martin Luther King Jr. often used, but he was being, in many cases, manipulated by actual communists working for a mass murdering dictatorship in Moscow. And this is all in the FBI records. We have the documents proving this, just nobody wants to prove it. A lot of it's still classified, of course. They don't want to declassify a lot of this because it would kind of cloud the narrative that they're trying to spin here. But a lot of this is outlined again in Uncle Tom too. And if people really want to understand what has been perpetrated against the black community in America, communists, by progressives, by evildoers who are hoping to exploit them and use them for sinister political purposes, not help them. And we've got a lot of communists who've actually, black Americans who've defected from the communist movement and have blown the whistle on this. People like Manning Johnson. I cannot encourage strongly enough people to go look up Manning Johnson. This is an American black individual who became fascinated by communism, joined the party, was taken over to Moscow, and then blew the whistle. He said these are some of the most racist, vile individuals that you will ever imagine, and yet they're sucking up to black Americans as if they were going to liberate them from the alleged oppression that they were experiencing. Folks, you need to understand this history if you really want to understand this. And Sam Blumenfeld warned about this. I was listening to a speech he gave in 1985 up in the Albany area of New York, and he warned that the government schools were deliberately creating a ticking time bomb. They were dumbing down deliberately, in particular, black American boys. They were using quackery so that they would never be able to learn how to read. They were teaching them that all of their problems were a result of white supremacy, white privilege, the white man, and they were creating ticking time bombs. That's exactly what they did. And folks, there are only a couple of possible explanations for this. Either the people who did this are incredibly stupid or they're incredibly brilliant. And I think the evidence shows overwhelmingly the people who did this were incredibly brilliant. They were also incredibly evil, and they did it on purpose.
We're going to take a short break and come back with another example of this kind of mindless violence that doesn't seem to make sense even to the African American community. We'll see you in a moment. So keeping with our theme today, we're trying to understand very complicated issues here about how there is such little regard to life in many aspects of urban black culture now, inner city culture. We talked about how in the first segment, a lot of this has to do with progressive liberals and the way they have diseducated children and kept them away from those opportunities that all Americans have in the name of ideology. But this next story is awfully hard to fathom. We've got a 19-year-old young African American who sucker punches somebody dangerously, clobbers him, an unsuspecting person. And when he's arrested for this, he doesn't quite understand what he did wrong, and he doesn't understand why people won't just forgive him for his brutality. There's a huge disconnect here. Take a look at the video.
Not far from peaceful Wortham Park, where he's accused of randomly punching strangers.
Do you regret it?
Yes, I do.
19-year-old Alfred Lewis spoke with me about how he feels about it now.
You know, I just made a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes.
This is the video in question, first shared with KHOU 11 via the Nextdoor app. In it, you can clearly see Lewis striking a man in the head from behind before he turns around in shock.
I know, like, from the video, all you see is, like, the bad part about it, but what people didn't see was that I shook his hand after and how I had gave the man a hug.
That is something we cannot verify, nor can we confirm that another man seen in the video getting punched and grabbed later left on good terms, according to Lewis.
I really didn't expect for it to just go so left, you know?
I told Lewis that law enforcement is investigating the incident, something his mother and father were also aware of.
And your mom's probably disappointed.
Yeah, she is.
It's just staggering, the level of inability to see just the evil of this, right? I mean, so you clock the guy in a very dangerous way, take a full swing in the ear, the temple of this guy, and then, according to him anyway, you hugged him later? I mean, what schizophrenic kind of moral code are we living here?
Yeah, and it's typical of the prevailing morality in the United States today. The government schools have turned children against God. They've turned children against the Bible. They've turned children against the moral code that God revealed to everybody in the Bible and, of course, wrote on people's hearts. And so we act surprised when kids come to school with a gun and shoot each other, when kids go home and hang themselves in their closet, when kids ruthlessly beat each other up. This is a direct result of a poisonous, evil worldview that they are being indoctrinated to hold. And so it's going to get worse unless and until we stop this.
The media is only focusing on the bad aspects of this. I mean, that if they understood the whole reason that and apparently by his own confession, he was doing this multiple times, not just to one person. This was over and over and over again. This was his modus operandi. And you're only seeing the bad parts of this. Wow. I mean, I don't know what to say. And you are right to point out that the broader moral code in this country is eroding really quickly. The idea that morality is based in justice and equality, not equity and social restorative justice, is having a deep toll on what we do. And I go back to what we said a little bit earlier. This irrational support of young college kids for the terrorists is shocking. I mean, this is the same leftist crowd that wants to protect the life, talks about how people are unsafe and we got to deal with protecting people by law, and yet when it happens against Jews in Gaza, well, it's just a matter of liberation. This is how liberation works.
Yeah. Well, it didn't happen in a vacuum, as the Secretary of the United Abominations said, right? It's clearly amazing. And so, this is the left for you. This is the totalitarians who are running your public school system, who are trying to take over all of corporate America, who unfortunately are now running the federal government. Folks, the fruit of this poison is going to be more of what we're seeing, and then even more, and then so much more that our society will not be able to survive. We've got to get this under control.
Well, I would throw in here the 40-year war the left has waged and won, by the way. We have turned victimhood into heroism. So the more you can claim victimhood, the more you fashion yourself as a victim, even if you're not. The more you can claim victimhood, the more you have carte blanche morally to hurt, to punch, to kill, to stomp, to burn, to loot, to shoplift. The more you can claim that somehow society owes you something because you've been victimized by something that happened hundreds of years ago, there's no moral code left. Whatever you do to protest that, it's considered good.
Yeah. It's totally upside down. The Bible actually talks about those who call evil good and good evil. We're there, folks. We're there. These people are saying that castrating little boys is good and that protecting children from this is bad. They're saying that weird middle-aged men prancing around in mini skirts dressed as grotesque characters of women in front of kindergarten children, that's good. Parents who are upset about that, that's bad. Folks, the crazy train is going over the cliff and our country is hitched to it. We have got to stop this. And I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. We have got to stop this, and we've got to do it soon.
And don't forget, words are hate speech. Words are violence. But violence is justice. Man, I mean, you couldn't ask for a more clear opposition to the Gospels of Christ. You could not ask for a moral code more at odds with Judeo-Christianity. And that's going to wrap up the show. If you enjoy the program, please subscribe to our podcast channel. Simply search Dr. Duke Show on your favorite free platform. And don't forget to follow us on Rumble. Visit rumble.com/freedomproject. For all of us here and for Alex Newman, thanks. We'll see you next time.